Okay, so let's dive straight into this. If you haven't already watched my video, Typical Debate Between Atheist and Theist, I would suggest you do so. It's not required, but it might serve to provide some context for the rest of this video. Anyway, in that video, I recounted parts of my conversation with another YouTube user, Tony Bones. Now, I guess I should have been polite enough to inform Tony Bones that I'd made that video, but frankly, that thought didn't really cross my mind until he found it himself. So, Tony Bones, sorry dude. Anyway, the typical debate is now continuing in the comments on that video, so basically if you don't want to bother watching the video, you could also just read the comments. It's pretty much the same arguments over and over and over again. Now, this morning I awoke to find a video response by a user by the name of KugelForBreakfast, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, please feel free to correct me. Anyway, she's apparently just joined YouTube and this was her first video, so the rest of this video will be a response to her. Okay, so I'm going to try and be as polite as possible here, and I apologize in advance if I get frustrated going through this. Please believe me that I am not frustrated at you per se. I'm merely frustrated because many of the arguments you've made are arguments that I have heard repeated ad nauseum and have addressed before. But we'll get into that.
Hello YouTubers. This is a response to a video called Typical Debate Between Atheist and Theist, posted by CapnOrdinary. I'm actually agnostic.
What a coincidence. So am I. I'm probably going to need to clarify that. Agnosticism or Gnosticism goes to what you know. Atheism, theism, or deism goes to what you believe. Now, I know I made several videos previously about why I'm not an agnostic, or rather why I don't use that term to describe myself. I have, however, refined my point of view since then, so let me briefly cover this. I am agnostic as far as the general concept of gods is concerned. This is because a god is not a well-defined thing, so I cannot exclude the possibility that somewhere, somehow, there might be something, or indeed someone, that we would describe as a quote-unquote god. However, I am a gnostic atheist as far as the Abrahamic God is concerned, because frankly, that God is not only self-contradictory by definition, I'm convinced that it could not exist as described in any of the various holy books of the Abrahamic faiths. Anyway, let's move on.
I'm actually agnostic, so I tried to watch the video without any bias, and I seem to be the only person who was able to at least understand where Tony Bones was coming from with the idea that there might be hell, so it would be better to take the safe route and stick with God. So let me start off by saying, Tony Bones, I don't think you're an idiot. You actually made some logical points.
Okay, let's address this here. This argument is the one we call Pascal's wager, named after the French philosopher who proposed it as an argument for belief in God, published after his death. Note that it is an argument for why you should believe in God, not an argument about whether God exists or not. So let's examine what the argument is, and why I don't believe it works. The argument goes like this. The cost of not believing in God is huge, if God is real, while the cost of believing in God is minuscule, so that even if God does not exist, it's better to believe that he does, on the off chance that he might, in order to avoid hellfire and eternal damnation. So there's a few reasons why I don't think this works. First of all, how do we tell which faith is the right one? Which version of God should we follow, and which of the many sects within our chosen religion should we believe in terms of how to get into heaven? There are several thousand sects of Christianity, plus the various Muslim and Jewish groups, not to mention all the non-Abrahamic faiths out there, from Hinduism to Zoroastrianism. So which one's the right one, and how do we tell? Secondly, I cannot force myself to believe something. In other words, I cannot believe something on purpose. I'm going to have to try to clarify this. It is impossible for me to believe in a proposal that I don't find convincing, even if there was some benefit to believing it. If I was diagnosed with cancer in multiple locations in my body, for example, I could not choose to believe that it wouldn't kill me, even though it would probably make what was left of my life happier. If I'm not convinced that something exists, I cannot choose to believe that it does, even for my own benefit. I can pretend, sure, but if you pretend to believe in an all-powerful God, even though actually you don't, and he then does exist, don't you think he'd be able to tell the difference? So what would be the point? Moving on.
Anyway, my next comment is a response to when CapnOrdinary said it was irrational to want to get into heaven if there happened to be such a place. Actually, that's very rational, as opposed to an eternity in hell suffering.
I don't remember claiming that it would be irrational to want to get into heaven, if heaven did in fact exist. If I did claim that, I was obviously talking out of my ass at the time, although I must admit that as described to me, heaven sounds ridiculously dull, and all the interesting people are in hell anyway. But whatever. The point is, please point out where I said that it was irrational to want to get into heaven, assuming that heaven and hell existed. Thank you. Moving on.
Then, when Tony Bones asked probably the simplest question, will you name a benefit of atheism? All CapnOrdinary could come up with was being able to make his own decisions, not decisions based on a Bronze Age fantasy novel. Come on, what kind of a response is that?
It's the only response there is. Atheism has no benefits in and of itself, except the absence of belief in any deities. Because that is all it is. There is no thing that is atheism. It's not a belief system. It's simply a term we've invented to describe not believing in something. I'm not an atheist because I believe something specific about how life began, or about how humans came to be, or about what religion has done to the world, or anything like that. I am an atheist because I simply am not convinced that there is, or indeed could be, such a thing as a quote-unquote God. If religion would simply step up and meet its burden of proof, I would no longer be an atheist. So far, religion has not been able to do that.
That's probably the simplest question. Why do you believe what you believe?
It's not simple, because atheism isn't a belief. It's a disbelief. I don't believe, therefore I am an atheist. It's like asking a bald man to describe his haircut without referring to the fact that he has no hair. Can't be done.
And on top of that, it's not just atheists, Christians, agnostics, we all are able to make our own decisions. Christians just make the decision to follow God.
No. Christians have somehow been convinced of the existence of one variation of the Christian gods or another, or of the truth of the Bible. Once convinced, it is entirely logical for them to try and follow what it says in the Bible. I personally think they do a fairly poor job of it, but that's a different matter altogether. When I was convinced that there was a God, and the Bible was true, I followed him too. Today I am not convinced, and so I am not bound to follow what it says in the Bible. Which is good, because I really hate having to hate someone for things they can't change. What would be completely irrational, although understandable in light of the questionable morality of the God of the Bible, would be to believe he existed, yet choose not to follow his commandments. Moving on.
Plus, CapnOrdinary, you never mentioned how being atheist might help you in the afterlife.
That's because I don't believe there is an afterlife. Once again, those claiming that there is simply haven't met the burden of proof necessary to support that claim. Moving on.
Instead, you just kind of attack Christianity again. Notice the pattern?
Yes, the pattern is that atheism is nothing but disbelief. It's not a set of beliefs in itself. It doesn't offer anything. It doesn't do anything at all. All it is that I don't believe in the claims that there is a God out there.
Even Tony Bones was able to admit that he wasn't sure, but still Christianity seems like the choice with the best chance of a good outcome.
Why? Why does it seem like a better chance than, say, Islam or Baha'i or Buddhism? I'm sorry, I don't see it. And once again, I can't fake belief. I'm either convinced by a claim or I'm not. And I don't believe something is true until I've been provided with evidence for it, and even then I only consider it true provisionally, because contradictory evidence may come to light at a later date. Moving on.
That was actually one of his stronger points, and that's what kind of got me thinking seriously about Christianity. Because atheists, you can't disprove God.
And you can't provide any evidence for the existence of any god or gods. You can't even define what a god is. So frankly, I don't see why I should bother even trying to disprove the existence of a god, any more than I should bother trying to disprove the existence of leprechauns or pixies, which, by the way, I can't disprove either.
And there's still a lot of holes in science, including evolution.
If by holes in science you mean stuff we don't know yet, then yes, there's a lot of stuff we don't know yet. But consider, science has had, what, 200 years maybe, to work out how the universe works? We've done far better by now than religion did in thousands. Also, the fact that there are things we do not know yet, or even things we may never know, does not serve to provide evidence for any gods. And another thing, please provide some of these holes in evolution you talk about. I do advise you, though, to take the time to Google it before you do. Try and see if you can find somewhere where a scientist has addressed your quote-unquote hole. That way I won't have to waste my time with the same claims the creationists have had blow up in their faces repeatedly. Also, I would recommend you watch the videos of Aaron Ra, Potholer54, CDK007, Thunderfoot, and Don Exodus 2. Especially Don Exodus 2 might interest you since he's a Christian defending evolution vehemently. Moving on.